Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so I wanted to talk today about Pharaoh and how he says, let the people get back to work. Okay, so just a really quick overview of some of the things I've been saying in my previous videos. We are in the greater Exodus. So if you don't understand that, this will be a little confusing to you, but let me just get you up to speed. So we are in the greater Exodus, and the reason why is because instead of God's people, the nation of Israel, just in the land of Egypt, they are all in all the nations of the world. And what I believe is that God's people make up the Christians and the Jews around the world. And so we see Christians and Jewish people in all the different nations of the world. And so one of the things that we're going to see is, instead of plagues just being in Egypt, we are going to see plagues in many parts of the world. And so I made a list here of 1 week worth of stuff, of various plagues all going on. And this was all at the same time as the coronavirus, and then other epidemics. And then we see locust swarms and earthquakes and flooding and volcanoes. And so if you understand that these are the signs of the end of the world and the signs of Jesus' coming, then that would make sense to you. Okay, and one of the other concepts that I talk about in my previous video is the idea of morning and evening sacrifices. And so I talked about how the Holocaust would okay, so God's trying to build a temple, or a kingdom, and so one of the things when they were consecrating the altar, one of the things that God had him do was sacrifice a morning sacrifice and then an evening sacrifice. And so what I think has been going on is that the time of the Holocaust would be, the morning sacrifice would have been a shadow of what was going to happen in the time of the Holocaust, and that now we're in the coronavirus, and that is the shadow of that comes from the evening sacrifices, was a shadow of the coming coronavirus pandemic. So that if you understand that the people dying are like a type of sacrifice, then you will see that we need Jesus to come and put a stop to these sacrifices and grain offerings. And then so it says in Daniel 9:27 that he will come and make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. And in the middle of the week, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And so I believe that's talking about Jesus. One of the things that I didn't mention in my previous videos was, it was kind of interesting because during the month of Nisan, back during the time before the Holocaust, there was the Warsaw Ghetto, when there was a bunch of Jewish people in, this would have been in Poland, like in Poland. They were all put into a ghetto, and they saw that the Nazis were coming and were gonna come and bring them and send them to the the camps where they knew that they were gonna get killed. And so what they did was they staged an uprising. Basically, so it's kind of interesting because they were staging an uprising to protest against, the fact that they were, kind of like in a jail. They were in this ghetto. They were locked into this ghetto. And so they were protesting that, and then also, of course, protesting that they were going to get shipped off and get killed. And so I thought it was interesting that the time frame of that was during the month of Nisan, which, okay, so it actually, on the Gregorian calendar, actually happened April 19th. And so that was 77 years ago. And so I thought it was interesting because it seemed like there was kind of this parallel connection with the people protesting in this day and age about the lockdowns in the various states. And then I think there's protests in other countries too. So I saw a connection with that. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the beast from the earth. And so I've talked about this before in my previous videos, but I had some more insights of how this connects to Trump. And so we always kind of hear about the Antichrist being connected to the 666. And one of the things that we're not really taught is that there's actually like 3 beasts mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Revelation. And so this will be in the New Testament. And so the Revelation actually talks about a red dragon. So we see the dragon like in Revelation 12. And then in Revelation 13, it talks about the beast from the sea. And I was wondering if the red dragon could be connected to Obama, because red would be connected to the color of blood. And the red dragon is probably more of the Antichrist figure. Although the other beasts are definitely have Antichrist, behavior too. And then I was wondering if the beast from the sea was connected to maybe Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And then Revelation 13 goes on to talk about the beast from the earth. And I really think the beast from, I'm pretty confident about the red dragon and the beast from the earth, that the red dragon is Obama and the beast from the earth is Trump. A little foggy about the beast from the sea. But let's see. But let's talk about this beast from the earth. Okay, so in Revelation 13, it says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed." Okay, so this beast, okay, so the previous beast came out of the sea. And so the sea is definitely connected to, like, I kind of connect the sea to being the lies of Satan. But there might be more to the shadow of the sea picture, that God has, that I'm not totally getting. But definitely, like, Obama would be connected to the sea. And then, when it says the beast from the sea, and you have like Hillary Clinton and Kerry, they're definitely connected to Obama. So maybe it's the beast from the sea is talking about people that are coming up, from Obama's camp, basically. And then the earth. Okay, so what I believe is that I think heaven is the prophetic shadow of the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, and that the earth is a prophetic shadow of the Christians and the nation of America. And so we have this beast coming up out of the earth. If that's true, then the beast coming up out of the earth, we'd be looking for a beast coming out of America. And so Trump definitely comes up from America. And then it's interesting that it talks about he spoke as a dragon. And so what I think the deal is that even though people think he's a good friend of Israel, Trump is actually very similar to Obama in that he's not really that good of a friend to Israel. He doesn't really love Israel like God does or the Messiah would. And then, and it says he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And so actually I wrote the first beast could be Messiah or it could be Obama. I mean, because the first beast could either be the red dragon, but we also see in other parts of the scripture talk about like the four horsemen. It's the second horseman that is red, and the first horse is white. And so I think the first horseman is connected to the Messiah riding on a white horse. And so the first beast actually could be Messiah, which works for these verses because it says he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And so if Jesus is the first beast, and beasts, these are just symbolic creatures, that God's using symbolism. I'm not saying that Jesus is a beast in any way. It's just a creature, or like the first horseman. And so what I think this verse could be saying is that we have Trump acting like the Messiah in the Messiah's presence. But what's interesting is that it actually works for both the Messiah or Obama, because if you could also say that Trump is exercising all the authority that Obama had when he was president in Obama's presence. So it actually works for both. So I thought that was interesting. Because when it talks about the first beast whose fatal wound was healed, both the Messiah had a fatal wound that was healed when he was resurrected, and then Obama, well, we haven't seen it yet, but he had a fatal wound because when Trump became president, all of a sudden Obama lost his power. And then I believe he's going to come back, and so we're going to see Obama's quote-unquote fatal wound healed when he comes back in power. And so that's going to be interesting to see. And then, okay, so then it goes on to say, he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to earth in the presence of men. Okay, so the great signs, what I think the great signs that Trump has done is the 666. And that the fire he causes to come down out of heaven to the earth is that he is causing judgment from heaven to come to America because of his 666 and his deal of the century. And so I talk about that in some of my previous videos too, if you want more information. And then it says, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast. Okay, so because of his 666 and his deal of the century, he was deceiving people. Okay, and so he was looking like a Messiah. He was kind of looking like a Messiah type figure where people thought he was actually going to help Israel make peace with their enemies, and so the people that believed that were really deceived. Okay. And the people that believe that Trump is a good friend of Israel are actually really deceived. So that's the deception I believe that is going on. And then it says, so what he's causing, this beast is causing those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. Okay, so same thing, this works for both the Messiah and for Obama, because one, he's causing people who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and come to life. Okay, so like the Messiah, it's like he's causing people, because of his signs that Trump did, because of the 666, he's causing people to turn him into like a messianic figure. So that would be the beast who had the wound of the sword and had come to life, being the Messiah. But the other thing too is that he's causing people, the deal of the century was just had a lot of parallels to the Iran deal, where it was somebody making a deal with, or trying to make a deal with, Israel's enemies, and making life harder for Israel. And so that would be, you could take these verses and apply them to Obama too, where the image that they made was like the deal of the century, which is really similar to the Iran deal that Obama made. Um, um, and then, okay, so then it says, and it's kind of hard because we have to look at these things really prophetically. They're prophetic shadows. So, you have to, it's kind of hard sometimes to see, um, what he's saying. Like we could, when we look at it, sometimes we look at it really literally. And so, like people are thinking of like a literal image that this beast is making, when it's actually just kind of a metaphorical image, you know. It's a metaphor to the fact that, there's no like image that people are bowing down and worshiping, but they are like bowing down to their belief that Trump is messianic. And then, okay, and it says, and it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Okay, so what happened was because of the fact that Trump acted like the Messiah, and so like he had this image of the beast or the likeness of the beast. So if the beast was the Messiah, he had this image, a messianic image, without being the actual Messiah. He gave breath to this image because of the things that he did. And so then this image would even speak and cause as many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So what happened is, because Trump was acting like the Messiah, there's two groups of people that are going to get killed. And so, because he was acting like the Messiah and because he had the steal of the century, he's going to cause people in both in America and Israel to be killed. And so the people in America, we've been seeing that have been getting killed by the coronavirus because of God's judgment on this nation. But we're also going to see, since I believe that the second part of the coronavirus plague is Israel getting attacked by its enemies, Trump is going to cause the Jewish people, and even the Jewish people in Israel that don't worship Trump as the Messiah and who are waiting for the true Messiah, they're going to get killed when they get attacked by their enemies. So that's going to happen. And then, so that's not good. Okay. And then it says, and he causes all the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell, and that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Okay, so what happens is, if you look at this list, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, I think it's talking about two groups of people. And so God's people would be like the small and the poor and the slaves. And so what happened is that Trump causes all of us, both his followers and Jesus's followers, to be given a mark. And so this is another symbolic thing. I talked about the mark being connected to the mark of leprosy, because what happens is if we're taught in the Torah that if you speak out against God's anointed, you get leprosy. Okay, and it's called the Mark of Leprosy in the Torah. And so basically what's happening is he's causing all of us to be under judgment, which is, if you understand that, then you understand why we can be looking for the Messiah to come really soon, because we're under judgment too, the followers of Jesus. And we need Jesus to set us free from this judgment. And then it says, because of he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark. Okay, so what happens is that what we're seeing is that with this coronavirus judgment, all of a sudden it got harder to shop. because now we have to wear masks. Now we have to worry about social distancing. Now they're limiting people in the stores. Things got shut down. So buying and selling got affected. Except you do kind of see the people that, okay, so it says, except the one who has the mark, it's easier for them to buy or sell. Because what happens is like, if you don't really believe you're going to get this disease, you're not worrying about social distancing. You're not wearing a mask. And so it's easier for you to go shopping. You're acting like life is the same as it's always been. And so I think that's what's happening. But then we're also seeing is that Trump wasn't willing to work with the governors who didn't agree with him. So if you have like the people that have the mark would be like people that kind of worship Trump. When during the coronavirus, Trump wasn't willing to work with the governors who didn't agree with them, so they weren't able to like buy and sell with the federal government. They had to go on their own to look for masks and ventilators and things like that. Um, um, so we saw that happening too. And then we see just more of that too in his administration. That like there was another guy too who, what was the deal? He questioned, Trump was, kind of talking about the one drug, that he thought would be good. And I guess this guy, I don't remember the exact story, but I guess he spoke out against it and said, he didn't, he I mean, he basically probably just said something rational like, well, we would just have to test it to see it works. But, whatever he did, Trump didn't like it. And the guy ended up getting put into a different position. So basically, we have, Trump not willing to work with people that aren't willing to, quote unquote, like worship the ground that he walks on. And then what's interesting too is that we see in the story of the 10 virgins, 5 of them go to the dealers to, the foolish ones have to go to the dealers to buy oil. And they end up missing the Messiah. So I thought that's a really interesting prophetical story, because if you understand how oil, like petroleum, the oil that makes gas that we use in our cars, like how it's really affected to our, like how it's connected to our economy. And it's just such a big picture of our economy. And so I just thought that was really interesting that we have these foolish virgins going to buy oil. Because what we could see, maybe there's a prophetic shadow in that parable that, we see this happening now, that people are wanting to get back to work. And they're wanting to get back to buying and selling. So I'm assuming that God's people still have a healthy fear of this coronavirus, and so they're worried about getting back to work, because we still have to have a healthy fear of this coronavirus. But what I'm thinking is that there's a group of people in this country that, a lot of them might be Trump followers, who don't really have a healthy fear, and all they care about is getting back to work. So they are the ones that are now on California's beaches, like not worrying about social distancing, and trying to go back in the stores shopping, and just like really being foolish. And so it really works that you have the foolish virgins are going to the dealers to buy oil, and they end up missing the Messiah. And so I like that, because I think what it means is, now that we see this group of people trying to get back into buying and selling, that we can like really expect the Messiah to come any day now, is what I believe. And so definitely look up, because your redemption draws nigh. And so I thought it was interesting. They're going to buy oil. Petroleum is like connected to the economy. in order to get back to work, people have to put gas in their car, so definitely kind of interesting. Um, um, okay, so, so I wanted to see how Trump uh, is fulfilling these prophecies, so this is happening in our day. Um, and so, I'm not really sure, like, people are looking for, like, a lot of people are talking about, what is that guy's name? The computer, um, the computer guy. Oh, I can't remember his name now. That, um, the rich computer guy is, well, he has this idea of coming up with the system where we'd get like a tattoo and it would say who has the who's gotten vaccinated. I mean, it's kind of interesting. We don't even have a vaccination yet, but this guy is already coming up with um um he's already coming up with the system to track the vaccination, which it's like getting the cart before the horse. And so I'm sorry I don't remember his name. Stephen Jobs is all I could think of, and I know that's not his name. Um, it's his partner. So, anyways, so people are really looking at that as being the mark of the beast. Um, and I mean, I don't really know what's going to happen after the Messiah comes and Obama gets back into, I mean, it might still, we might see something like that happening. I don't need it to happen because I already see that we fulfilled these prophecies of the mark. Because like I said, I think it's leprosy because, so Miriam spoke out against Moses and then she got leprosy for 7 days. And so that's a picture of how, like, America, we had our president made the steal of the century, which, so you're speaking out against the anointed one would be the Jewish people. Okay. And so then because we spoke out against the Jewish people, because Trump made the steal, because Trump made the Jewish people odious in the sight of their enemies and he's going to get them killed, we all have the mark of leprosy and we need Jesus to set us free from that. And so the 7 days would be, kind of, it's like, I think it's a prophetic shadow of the Feast of Booths, because the Feast of Booths is like 7 days. And then it's interesting because the nation of Israel could not move forward until Miriam's leprosy was dealt with. So just a lot of prophetic shadows there. And so, who knows what will happen, after the Messiah comes. I mean, we'll be taken care of, so it really won't matter that someone's got this idea of this tattoo and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then just another story in the Bible that I think is connected to this, to the 666 and everything like that is in Daniel 3, we had Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. But whoever, okay, and then I didn't put the whole story in here. You'll have to go read it. But it says, whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. That would be Daniel's 3 friends. He said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Okay, so I just wanted to really quickly talk about this story. Because another prophetic shadow about 666, I believe, because this image was 60 by 6, so we see, you know, at least 6 connected to this image. And it's interesting, the image was of gold, because I think gold are the Jewish people and silver are the Christians, the Gentiles, the Gentile followers of Jesus. So same thing again. This image of gold was, is like a metaphor, for what Trump did. So like the image of gold would be like the deal of the century. It's this deal that you made supposedly with the Jewish people, but you're really selling the land out from under them to the Palestinians. And so he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So there's a connection with Trump to Babylon, and he's really the harlot of Babylon. And then so what's interesting, it says, whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. I think we want to be in the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Okay, so if we understand right now that we are under judgment, we're in this furnace already of blazing fire. And so we want to go to the midst. We want to be in the midst, because who's in the midst? The Messiah is in the midst of the fire. Okay. And so then it's kind of interesting that it says, okay, so then what happens is all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music. What's interesting is that those all connect to the sounds from Babylon, okay, that we read about in Revelation 18. And so I'm thinking that this could be a picture of what's happening right now, is that people are like hearing the sound of America. They want to get back to work. They're kind of idolizing their old lives and want to get back to it. And so same thing, like the foolish virgins that are going to buy oil. These people are trying to get back to their lives, and and kind of like worshiping, they're falling down and worshiping this image, that Trump has of, first he's setting himself up to be like the Messiah of America, and that he's going to get us back to work and everything. And what's interesting is I think there's a lot of like images that are being worshipped right now. I think there's a lot of like false messianic figures, and Jesus said that was going to happen, that there was going to be a lot of false messiahs that come in the last days. And so especially now during the coronavirus, we have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork claiming to have a solution for the coronavirus. And so we have a lot of the false prophets, like in the church, that are claiming that they can rebuke the coronavirus and kill it off, and and pray for hot weather to come and kill it off. So just a lot of just really ridiculous behavior like that. But then we also see, just with a lot of our political figures, of governors claiming that they can get their states back to work. So there's just a lot of voices, and it's interesting too, because it's like all of a sudden a lot of the political figures all of a sudden, are like acting like prophets, saying that they know what's going to happen in the future, and they know this is going to be harder in the fall, and but then some are saying no, it's going to be easier, and so definitely a lot of false messiahs. And so what we have is these people falling down, before these various images. And then what's interesting, so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's 3 friends, they, so they weren't willing to fall down before, both, they weren't willing to fall down before Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. They weren't really willing to worship this false god. Okay. And so that's what we have now, is God's people right now. We're not willing to worship these false people that are claiming to be messiahs. and we're not even really worshiping the concept of getting back to work in America. Like, I mean, if you're like me, we kind of have a little bit of fear of people getting back to work because we have a healthy fear of the coronavirus. And so that's what we see. And so what happens is, Daniel's three friends. It's interesting that the story talks about them getting tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes. So I see a connection with, like, they are considered to be not naked, okay, that they're clothed, okay. Because Jesus said, Jesus warns about, you know, kind of being careful that you're not, found naked when the Messiah shows up. And that would be like you're exposed by your behavior, you know. And then what I think there's another connection too, because I think there's a connection to with the Exodus when they were coming out of Egypt. Moses had them ask their neighbors for, um, silver and gold, stuff like that. And so I think there's a connection too where, we're going to have all this extra clothes. We're going to be in the midst of the judgment, the blazing fire, but we're going to have, all the, we're going to have uh, a bunch of belongings from our neighbors. So I think there's a connection with that in this story, and then I love this line in the story, this verse, because it says, "Look, I see four men loose and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm." Okay, so there's a connection with the four men. There's a connection to the transfiguration because Jesus goes up on the mountain with three of his disciples, and he's transfigured, which is definitely a picture of like his resurrection. Um, and so what's neat about these people is that they're able to walk about in the midst of the fire without harm. So what's going to happen is when Jesus comes, um, he's obviously going to have the appearance of the Son of the Gods. He's going to be able to walk in the midst of the fire. He's going to help us walk about in the midst of the fire. We're going to be able to walk around with this coronavirus raging around us, and we won't be harmed by it. So just a great story. Okay, so here's another chapter that I want to talk about that we're fulfilling right now in our day and age. And so I want to talk about this one. I mentioned this in my last video, but I got some more insight into some of the ways we're fulfilling these prophecies. And so let's talk about this one. Okay, so this is Exodus 5. And it says, let's see. Okay, so it says, "Afterwards, Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness.' But Pharaoh said, 'Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go.'" So maybe I'll talk about it. I'll read a little and talk about it. So what we have is, let's see, like Moses and Aaron come and say to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness." So what I think this is a picture of is that this part right here, I think, is connected to, I think, what this is saying is that God wants his people to celebrate a feast to him in the wilderness. Okay, so if we understand that we're the woman in the wilderness, God wanted us to celebrate the Feast of Booths in the wilderness. Okay. Um, um, and so God's using that because he's trying to get his people out from under the grasp of Pharaoh. And so if Pharaoh in this case could be like Trump, but it could be any false Messiah that people are following, or any false leader, And then it says, Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord that I shall obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and besides, I will not let Israel go." Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Otherwise, he will fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. Okay, so now here, Pharaoh, right here, Pharaoh could be any of the enemies of Israel. And, so like they were saying, Moses and Aaron were, like saying, let the people in Israel go. And any of their enemies were saying, okay, I don't follow the Lord. I don't care what you say. But what we had is Moses and Aaron said, let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Otherwise, he may fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. So I think that's a prophetic shadow of Moses and Aaron could be Trump and Netanyahu at this point. And, the 3 days journey is the 666 that Trump did. And if you understand that was like 3 days of various declarations that Trump did, which all culminated in the deal of the century. So I think the 3 days connects to the 3 days of the 666. And then it's interesting because they were trying to do this because they thought that this would protect Israel from getting attacked by the sword. And so it's interesting that we see, that it says, otherwise he will fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. So like, what's interesting with the deal of the century, it's like they were trying to set it up so Israel would be protected. They were trying to set up peace for Israel, and so because they were trying to set Israel free from like the various terrorist groups that are constantly attacking Israel. They were trying to bring peace to Israel. They were trying to set Israel free from their plagues and the sword. And what's ironic about it is that they really ended up causing more pestilence and sword with the deal of the century. Because what happened is now we have the coronavirus, and then now we have Israel's going to get attacked by its enemies. Okay, so you got to be careful. You cannot set up a peace deal if God is not in it. And that's what happened. Okay, so then what's interesting is the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from the work? Get back to your labors. Okay, so that's what we see happening right now in America, is that we have this voice of Pharaoh, or the voice of the king of Egypt, trying to get people back to work. Okay. And then, again, Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many, and you would have them cease from their labors. So, so we've seen Trump, early on, that's actually what he, kind of stuff that he said, but now we have other voices too, saying the same thing, trying to get people back to work. Obviously, obviously I recognize the importance of an economy and going back to work, but we have to have wisdom about it. We have to be safe about it. And we really have this God-sized problem, because, it's easy to say, let the people get back to work, but we don't have a solution. We don't have a vaccine, we don't have a test to help people know whether they can, the antibody test, whether we can know, if we're safe, and we don't even really know, because one of the things they wonder is if we can recatch this thing, so this is really a God-sized problem, where you need a Messiah to really solve this problem. So be careful if you have, one of the things I talked about was during this coronavirus, we were going to see the wicked act wickedly, and so one of the things, if you have a boss who's wanting you to get back to work, but is not, like making sure that you're safe when you're working, that is a wicked boss. So it's interesting that it says, okay, so the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and the foremen, saying, "You are no longer to give the people straw and to make brick as previously." I mean, you are no longer to give the people straw to make brick as previously. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. So I was thinking that that could have been when Trump was saying he didn't give certain states masks or ventilators, and so you know he was telling them to go find it for themselves. So that's a possible fulfillment of that verse. And then it says, "But the quota of bricks which they were making previously, you shall impose on them. You are not to reduce any of it, because they're lazy. Therefore they cry out, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Let the labor be heavier on the men, and let them work at it, so they will pay no attention to false words." Okay, so it's interesting because, um, so I don't know if, like, some of these Pharaoh types that are saying, let people get back to work, they're being lazy. Um, what's interesting about it is that I don't believe God's people are lazy because they don't want to get back to work. They just have a healthy fear of the coronavirus. Okay. Um, so it's not laziness that's keeping us from going back to work, it's fear. you know. So so the voice that's saying we're lazy is a lie, obviously. Um and then so one thought I had was, let the labor be heavier on the men and let them work at it, so they would pay no attention to false words. So I don't know if that was Trump saying, let the labor be heavier on the governors and let them work at it, so they won't pay attention to false words. Because there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on at the beginning, where some of the governors were speaking out against some of the stuff that Trump was doing. And I mean, some of them were telling the truth and some of them were lying. I mean, there was wicked behavior everywhere. Um, and so, I don't know if Trump, decided to let the governors work harder, you know. So that could be a possible fulfillment of that. And then it says, the taskmasters of the people and their foremen went out and spoke to the people, saying, "Thus says Pharaoh, I'm not going to give you any straw. You go and get straw for yourselves wherever you can find it, but none of your labor will be reduced." Okay, so what's interesting about this is that the taskmasters, um, so then it says, the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters pressed them, saying, "Complete your work quota, your daily amount, just as when you had straw." So I see a possible fulfillment is the doctors there. Because that was one of the complaints that we heard about nurses and doctors, is that they were being forced to go back to work without proper equipment to protect them from getting the coronavirus. And so we had these taskmasters that were, so we had, like Pharaoh would be some of the leaders, political leaders in this country. But then also the taskmasters were telling people to go back to work, telling doctors and nurses to go to work, even though they didn't have proper equipment. So not good, So I think that's definitely a possible fulfillment. And then it goes on to say, "Moreover, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, 'Why have you not completed your required amount either yesterday or today in making bricks as previously?'" So there were people, um, there were people that were, basically being abused during this time. You know, saying, "Why aren't you working? Why don't you go back to work?" And I actually heard that there were some people that stayed home from work because they were worried about getting the coronavirus, and were being, they're, um, being treated poorly. So definitely we could see that happening. And then it says, "The foreman of the sons of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, 'Why do you deal this way with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, yet they keep saying to us, Make bricks, and behold, your servants are being beaten, but it is the fault of your own people.'" um, you know, so, um, so if you think of straw as being like mask and stuff like that, um, I mean, I think we probably will still going to see the same problem now because it's not like the supply chain has gotten any better with masks and stuff like that. I mean, people now are making their own mask. Um, we're trying to make do with the best that we have. Um, um, so, anyways, so we just see a lot of that wicked behavior, where God's people are being abused, because they want to be safe, they want to protect themselves, they want to protect their family. Um, okay, but then he said, "You are lazy, very lazy. Therefore, you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' So go now and work, for you will be given no straw, yet you must deliver the quota of bricks." Okay, we are not lazy. Okay. The foremen of the sons of Israel saw they were in trouble because they were told, "You must not reduce your daily amount of bricks." Okay, all of God's people, we see that we're in trouble because we're being called to go back to work and we don't have bricks. We don't have, not bricks, we don't have the straw that we have. We don't have, we don't have the supplies that we need. I mean, straw can be any material, um, you know, that, like the masks, to protect ourselves. We don't have vaccines, we don't have tests, so we know, God's people know we're in trouble. Okay. And then it goes on to say, when they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. They said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you have made us odious in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us." Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you ever send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done harm to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." So I think this is the second part of this plague is the sword. And the whole story, and so the odious part is, okay, so the Moses and Aaron would be a picture of the two witnesses. It's also a picture of Jacob's two sons that made Jacob's family odious in the sight of their enemies. And so Trump and Netanyahu are the two witnesses that have made Israel odious in the sight of their enemies, and now they are putting a sword in their hand to kill them, to kill Israel. And so what we see with the coronavirus, they're definitely, Israel's enemies are definitely planning to, going to take advantage of the fact that Israel right now is focused on the coronavirus. America is focused on the coronavirus. They're seeing it as an ideal time to attack. Um, so that's part 2 of this plague. Anyway, so we're living this out, and so God says, in these verses we could see kind of this progression, so just the concept of people going back to work, God's people saying, this is dangerous, we're in trouble, we need a Messiah, and then Israel's enemies saying, having a sword in their hand and wanting to kill him. So here's those verses at the bottom of the page, is the verses from Revelation. So first is Revelation 12:6, where the woman was in the wilderness for 1,260 days, which connects to the 666, which would be the 3 days in the wilderness. See, this will connect back to the first slide here, where it says, "Let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness." Okay, so that connects to that, the 666. Okay, and then what we're in now is Revelation 12. So we had 666, and now we're in Revelation 12:14, where it says, "The 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent." So what's interesting is the eagle has 2 wings, so that can be a picture of the 2 parts of this plague. but it also could be a picture of the eagle is a picture of the Messiah. And so, like, I think it could be a picture of, I think the first part in the wilderness, we were under the leadership of Trump. And then the second part of this plague, well, okay, what am I saying? I believe that after the Messiah comes, the coronavirus is going to continue to rage. But we are going to be, it's going to keep going, but we are then going to be under the wing of the Messiah. Okay. So there's two wings. It's like the first wing, we're under Trump. He didn't do a really good job of helping us out. We need the Messiah. Okay. And then, so the other wing of the great eagle would be Messiah. And he would be the one that really protects us. Jesus would really protect us from the presence of the serpent. Trump hasn't been doing that good of a job. And the serpent could be both a picture of, it's definitely a picture of the coronavirus, but it could be a picture of other, the Antichrist too, So, who I said's gonna come back. So let's see here. Okay, so one of the biggest questions that we all have is, what is the timing of all this? How much longer are we going to be under the coronavirus? And so when I first looked at it, I took the times and half time and thought maybe that was 3.5 weeks, but it's not that short. That was wishful thinking on my part. I always want it shorter. I always make everything shorter. I'm not a good prophet. That's why I'm the partial prophet, because I always try to make everything shorter. So my latest thinking is that, so what I think is that this connects to the story of Noah, the time frame that we're in. And God told Noah that after 7 more days, I'm going to send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Okay. And then, so it talks about people going into the ark with Noah by twos. Okay, so there's just a lot of prophetic shadows in this story of Noah. Okay, and obviously Jesus said when he comes, it's going to be like the time of Noah. So we definitely want to look at the story of Noah to see what's going to be happening during this time. And so God told Noah that there was going to be a time frame of 7 days. There was going to be rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And that people were going to join Noah in the ark by twos. Okay, male and female. So if you understand that the male would be a connection to the Jewish people, the female would be a connection to the Christians. So what we have is the Jewish people and the Christians joining Noah in the ark. And so, like if Noah's the messianic figure, it's the Jewish people and the Christians joining in the sufferings of Messiah during the coronavirus. So, and it's interesting because the water of the flood came in the 600 year of Noah's life. So that's a connection to the 666, of Trump. It's the judgment. The flood that came is, okay, so don't look at this word flood so literally. It's a metaphor for the coronavirus. This flood that came was the coronavirus. Okay. And so let's see. Okay, so what I had was, I was wondering if March 11th to March 17th was the 7 days. Okay, because what was interesting is March 11th was when, I call it 3/11, because it was like, oh my gosh, the end of the world, it felt like on 3/11, because that was when, Trump said he was shutting down the country. That was when the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic. That was when they canceled sporting events. It just seemed like the world was falling apart. And so that's why I call it 3/11. So definitely the judgment of God and stuff like that. What's interesting is that was Adar 15. And so March 11th to March 17th was Adar 15 to 21. 15 to 21 would be connected to the Feast of Tabernacles. It also connects to Passover, but the Feast of Tabernacles definitely fits the shadow of, the isolation for the coronavirus. being in our booths. And then I was wondering if, because what happened in these verses is it says that, okay, the water of the flood came upon the earth in the 600 year of Noah's life in the second month on the 17th day of the month. And then it says all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the sky were opened. And so basically we saw judgment coming, from two directions basically. And so I was wondering if, okay, so what was interesting about March 17th is that, it's a 17, I mean, it would be like the second month after the deal of the century. So February would be the first month, March would be the second month after the deal of the century. It was also the 7th week after the deal of the century. So what's interesting about that is that, that would be like the 49th day, and then the next day, the 18th, would be the 50th day. And on the 50th day, when they were counting the Omer, on the 50th day, they offered a new sacrifice. So maybe kind of this concept with the coronavirus, there's a new sacrifice being offered to God. What's interesting on March 17th was it was the 50th state. That was when the 50th state had coronavirus. So then it was in all the states on that date. And then that was also the day that Israel started going on their partial lockdown or some kind of lockdown. And then, so what I was wondering is that, so then after the 7 days, then there was going to be 40 days. So I'm wondering if the 40 days is March 18th to April 26th. Okay. What we see in the Exodus story is that God talks about there being a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And then it's interesting that we see that concept of day and night repeated in the 40 days and 40 nights. So what I'm wondering is that, like I said before, that I think we have like 40 days. This is what I believe, is that I think we have like 40 days of the coronavirus under Trump. And so that would be the time of the pillar of cloud. Okay, so the pillar of cloud could either be, I mean, maybe it's a connection to Trump, where Trump could be like the clouds with no water, that God talks about. But it also could be a picture of like how we maybe aren't really seeing really clearly during this time. Or like the people that look at Trump as a messianic figure are like looking through a cloud, but then it talks about a pillar of fire by night. So I'm wondering is when the Messiah comes, then there's going to be 40 more days of the coronavirus judgment plague. But the pillar of fire would be a picture of the Messiah. That's what I'm wondering. And so what's interesting, so April 26th was yesterday, today's the 27th. So I'm wondering actually too, is, okay, so like, if that was the end of the 40 days, that could be the end of the Feast of Booths. That would be like a 21st day. April 26th would be like the 21st. And then we see Daniel was mourning for 3 full weeks. So that would be 21 days. And then on the 24th, he has an encounter with the messianic figure. Like actually he falls down dead and then he has an encounter with the messianic figure. Or like he sort of has an encounter with like 2 messianic type figures. Sort of, kind of. I mean, he sees something and then he falls down dead, and then he has a messianic figure that kind of helps him to stand on his feet. I mean, it's all Gabriel, but Gabriel could be a picture of 2 messianic figures, one being like the false one of Trump, who caused him to, fall down dead, and then, the other, then when Gabriel resurrects Daniel, that could be a picture of the Messiah. And so that happened like on the 24th. So that would be like 3 days after his 3 weeks of mourning. Okay. So, like I said, I tried to make I was hoping the coronavirus would be 3 weeks, but it isn't really 3 weeks. I mean, this is the problem when you look at verses and time frames in the Bible. Things are all kind of metaphors, and so the 3 weeks, well, there is partly a picture to the 3 days of the 666, where Daniel was mourning during the time of the 666. But then we have, you know, the kind of that concept of the 21 connected to the last day of the Feast of Booths. So then what we want to do is look what happens on the third day after the 21st, which would be the 24th. So what's interesting, what we have coming up this month is April 28th is Yom HaZikaron, which is the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism. It was also when the Warsaw Ghetto burned to the ground. So definitely kind of interesting. So that could be, we could see maybe something happen. So that's tomorrow. We could see maybe something happen. Maybe Israel will get attacked tomorrow. Either tomorrow or Wednesday. So Wednesday is April 29th. Yom HaZamot is Israel's Independence Day, 72 years. So that would actually be like day 43. So the 28th would be day 42. And we see in Revelation where they trampled the holy city for 42 months. So that's why I'm looking at these two dates, like really kind of that night in between the two of what's going to happen as a possible. But we'll see. I'm really bad with timing, so we'll just have to see what happens. Let's see. Okay, so I just wanted to bring out some of the other verses that talk about, the sword part of the plague. And so what we see in Exodus is, okay, so the Israelites left Egypt, and, this is in the first Exodus. They left Egypt, and then, God tells Moses to tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pitaheroth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal Zephon, opposite by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. But Moses said to the people, do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, and he will accomplish which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see him again forever. Okay, I don't have the whole story in there, so if you want to read the whole story, pull out your Bible. But I thought it was interesting. So they had left Egypt, and then they, this is when they went to the Red Sea. And so Pharaoh, he said, okay, they're wandering aimlessly. The wilderness has shut them in. Okay, and so then what God did was he hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would chase after them. Okay, so what I think is going to happen is, I think this is a shadow of what's going to happen to Israel today, or in our time frame, in our day and age, because what's interesting is that I think Israel's enemies are going to see that they're kind of wandering aimlessly. Like right now, Israel's more focused on the coronavirus and not as focused on their enemies as they need to be. Okay, so I think Israel's enemies could take advantage of this. And it says the wilderness has shut them in. What's interesting is that, for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaZamot, that the government has, basically put them on restrictions, so they're gonna be shut up during these days. So Israel's enemies could take advantage of that. Oh, so if you look above, I did write, okay, so April 26th was the end of the Feast of Booths for some people. And then, so is this day 21? Like I was talking about before. And then April 29th, I wrote, so is this day 24? What's interesting is it's the middle of the week. It's a Wednesday, so that, we see where the Messiah is going to put a stop to sacrifice in the middle of the week, so is that, so I don't know if the middle of the week is when he shows up or the middle of the week that he's here. But it's interesting that that's a Wednesday, And so it's the 72nd anniversary. I mean, some people say like it's the start of the 73rd year. It just depends on how you count things. Um, so anyways, these verses in Exodus 14 talk about God hardening Pharaoh's heart so he will chase after them. So God is going to cause, and so really what I think we want to keep an eye on is Turkey and Iran. Maybe Russia, I'm not sure. Definitely pretty confident about Turkey and Iran. Because there's been a lot of things set up with them. So anyways, and then it says, Moses said to the people, do not fear. Okay, so what's interesting is that connected to the story, Moses says, do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. So what we kind of see is this connection of, like stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Well, who is the salvation of the Lord? The salvation of the Lord is the Messiah. So definitely very interesting. And then okay, so then what did I write here? Okay, so Genesis 8, it says it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. Okay, then Noah removed the covering of the ark, and look, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. So like the 601st year. So the 600 year was when the floods came. And then the 601st year could be a picture of when the Messiah comes. Because actually 601 could be added up to be 7, which would connect to the Messiah. But what's interesting, it says, then Noah removed the covering of the ark. That could be connected to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. That could be a picture of God removing the covering of Israel. So anyways, so it's, and then it says in the second month on the 27th day of the month the earth was dry. Okay, so that could be today, April 27th, the earth is dry. So that is that a prophetic shadow, like are Israel's enemies looking and they're seeing like maybe we're, I don't know, not really sure. So but definitely interesting. So we have the second month could also be April if you are counting the 2 months of the coronavirus, March and April. So, but I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how these work out. And then we also see like in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. So so this could also be the 7th month. There's a connection too. I mean, it depends on, there's all these different countings that are going on, because like we're counting days since the deal of the century, but I've also been counting months since Trump removed the troops from Syria. And so this is really like the 7th month after Trump removed the troops from Syria. And so let's see. So that was like October 6th or October 7th. And so if you take 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, or 24, so I don't know, because that would have been like last week. So I'm not really sure. Anyways, I'm sorry. I don't really know that much about these verses, but definitely things that are coming up that we want to keep an eye on. And then this was just wanted to remind you about these verses about Amalek, where he attacked all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary. And that was when Daniel was speaking in prayer, came to him in his extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. So we see this connection of weariness, being connected to the evening offering, so we see, Amalek could definitely be a picture of Turkey, and or Iran, probably together, working together, attacking Israel when they're faint and weary, when they're busy right now with the coronavirus. So like I said, I was times and half time. I was wondering if they were connected to 3.5 weeks. It's definitely longer than that, but I'm wondering too if there's a connection with, like I said, the 1335 could be a metaphor where like 1 could be connected to Trump, 5 could be connected to Messiah, and 3 and 3 could be, like they could be a picture of a week time frame where like Jesus is kind of in the middle, where you have 3 days before and 3 days after, Jesus putting a stop to sacrificing grain offering. That was one thought I had about that. But here's the verse in Daniel 12 where it says, many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. So this is where we see what God's trying to accomplish during this time, is he's purifying, he's refining us, but we are going to see the wicked act wickedly. Okay. Okay, so then, so I wanted to point out in Daniel 9, so do we see prophesied kind of this rebuilding of America? Okay. So in Daniel 9, we see, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. I think that's where we are right now prophetically. Okay. Because they're trying to rebuild America, with plaza and moat. Like moat would be a picture of what you put for your protection. Plaza would be the city square. So like it's being built again, but we all have to wear masks. So that would be the moat. Okay. The city square, it seems like bad things happen in the city square in scripture. Because God's people are, like the angels that come to Lot are, we're gonna go sleep in the city square, and Lot said, oh no, don't do that. So there might be a picture of that with the plaza. And then it talks about after 62 weeks the Messiah, which also could say the anointed one, will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So what I think is interesting is that April 26th is 12 weeks after Groundhog Day. And so, I talked about 7 weeks earlier, taking us to the beginning of the shutdown on March 18th or 17th. And then we've had 12. There's been 2 times frames of 6 weeks, because it was 6 weeks after Groundhog Day that the shutdown started, and then it's been 6 weeks since then. So that could be the fulfillment of the 62 weeks. So we could be in that time frame. And then I wrote down, like, we have the city, and then we have the sanctuary, and the city, the city's end could come with a flood, and the sanctuary's end could come with the war. Okay. So, that's the last part of this verse, and its end. Okay. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with the flood, even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. So the city could be a picture of America affected by the flood, which would be the coronavirus. And then the sanctuary obviously could be a picture of Israel. And then that its end could come with the war. So, anyways, so like I said, we're in the Feast of Booths. So it goes to the 15th and the 21st, and God says, okay, so if you read what he said, you shall live in booths for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in booths, so that your generations may know I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so if we understand that God, before he's going to bring his people out from the land of Egypt, he's going to have them live in booths. Okay. And so that picture helps us understand this time of the coronavirus. And we also understand who really caused the coronavirus. I mean, it was something that God allowed to happen because he wanted us to live in booths. Okay. To get us ready for the coming of the Messiah. And so, so when he's talking about the Feast of Booths, he says, "You shall do no laborious work of any kind." Okay, so definitely what was happening during the coronavirus. And then also too, it says for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire. So definitely we saw people dying every day during the coronavirus. And then it talks about this 8th day where there's another holy convocation and an offering by fire to the Lord. So we're waiting for the 8th day. And like I said, Miriam had leprosy for 7 days, so that was a picture of the Feast of Booths. Okay. So here's I just wanted to bring up some other verses that talk about the Feast of Booths. Okay, so in Hosea, he says, "Therefore return to your God, observe kindness and justice, and wait for your God continually. A merchant in whose hands are false balances, he loves to oppress. And Ephraim said, Surely I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors they will find in me no iniquity, which would be sin. But I have been the Lord your God since the land of Egypt, and I will make you live in tents again, as in the days of the appointed festival." Okay, so we see God wanting his people to return to him, okay, and to observe kindness and justice and to wait for him continually. And then, he talks about Ephraim, saying, "Surely I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors they will find in me no iniquity." Okay, but God was saying, Ephraim thinks they have become rich and they really haven't. Okay. They really need the Messiah. So Ephraim is the northern kingdom. Which would be a picture of the Christians in America. Okay, so God said, "I will make you live in tents again." Okay, as in the days of the appointed festival. Okay, so God said, "I'm going to make you I'm going to make you live in tents because I want you to return to me. I want you to stop your life and return to me." So if you understand that God is the one who orchestrated all this, then you'd understand that only God would have the solution for it. Okay, yes, he uses wicked people like the people in China, however it came about, but God was the one who orchestrated this. And then in Psalm 27, we see, "For in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle. In the secret place of his tent he will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock." So there's also, when Jesus comes, we're also going to continue this being in the Feast of Booths. Okay, we haven't fulfilled all the prophecies, all the shadows in the Feast of Booths. in Sukkot, because actually during Sukkot, which is what the Jewish people call the Feast of Booths, is actually during Sukkot, the Jewish people, they wave palm branches every day. Okay. Um, it's called the lulav, and they call it shaking their lulav. And we see a connection with the palm branches to Jesus's triumphal entry. And so, what I believe is that when Jesus comes, we're going to have another 7 days of the full fulfillment of the Feast of Booths, um, with the palm branches. So we're going to be waving palm branches at Jesus when he comes. And so this verse, Psalm 27, actually, could be more messianic, because it says, he will lift me up on a rock. And obviously, Jesus is the rock of our salvation. Okay. Let's see. What else do I have here? So Haggai actually talks about, so there's, so I was kind of wondering if, okay, so I brought together kind of the different verses about the 7th month. Okay, so in the 7th month, on the 17th day, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Okay, so is that a picture of the middle of the week? Because if the Feast of Booths is 15 to the 21, then 17 would be the middle of the week. So, so that actually maybe hasn't happened yet. So we're waiting for that maybe to happen, in the middle of the week when Jesus is here. So, I'm not really sure, because the ark resting, Ararat could be a picture of Turkey. So I'm not totally sure of the prophetic fulfillment of this verse. But then in Haggai 9, we see the 21st of the 7th month. That would be connected to the 7th day of the Feast of Booths. Okay, so then it says, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying, who is left among you who saw this temple in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Does it seem to you like nothing in comparison? But now take courage, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Take courage also, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and all you people of the land, take courage, declares the Lord, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. As for the promise I made with you when you came out of Egypt, my spirit is abiding in your midst. Do not fear. For thus says the Lord of hosts, once more in a little while I am going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea also, and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and they will come with the wealth of all nations, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house will be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts. So what I'm thinking we're seeing in these verses is, okay, so this could be the end of the Feast of Booths of the 7 days when Jesus is here. Okay, so the 21st, would be the 7th day that Jesus was here. So what's interesting is that in the rapture story, we don't really have this picture of kind of the rebuilding of America. So I want to say I don't believe in replacement theology. I don't think that the church replaces Israel, but what I believe is that God's people are made up of both Christians and Jews, and that God is going to work with both the nation of Israel and the nation of America. Okay. And so it's interesting if you look at these verses connected to America, and you can even see them connected to Israel, where because of the coronavirus, all of a sudden it's not the same thing. Okay. God says, okay, so it's interesting because God is actually speaking to the remnant of the people. Okay. So the remnant would always be the people that are left over that follow God. Okay. Because not everyone follows God. Okay. So God will be speaking to the remnant, which would be the people that are left over that follow God. Um, and so he's asking them who saw this temple in his former glory. So who saw the nation of Israel? Who saw the nation of America in its former glory? How do you see it now? Does it seem to you like nothing? Okay, because what happened? The coronavirus made a train wreck of both the countries. Okay, both countries. And so then what God says, take courage, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Take courage also, Joshua, and all you people of the land, take courage and work, for I am with you. Okay, so what's going to happen is that during the time of Jesus, he's going to call us back to work, and we are going to be able to take courage and not be afraid. Okay, but I don't think this is happening just yet because, it says, for I'm with you. I don't think God is quite with us yet. We need Jesus to come and bring his presence, back. Because then it says, as for the promise which I made you when you came out of Egypt, I don't think we've been completely taken out of Egypt. We need Jesus to finish that process. And then it's interesting that God says, for once more in a little while, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land, and all the nations, and they will come with the wealth of all nations. Okay, so there's just a lot more that God's going to do. A lot more shaking. Okay, but at this shaking, is where he's bringing in the wealth of the nations into God's land. Okay, and then he talks about the latter glory of this house will be greater than the former. And in this place I will give peace. Okay, so obviously a view of the Messianic kingdom there. Definitely something to look forward to. It's gonna be good. So, and then I think I mentioned this before too. We're in the flood. Okay, and so this one verse, so people, okay, so it says, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah, for in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. So people are kind of looking for a return of eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. I mean, we're sort of seeing that. I don't think we need to see it completely, because if you have Noah entering the ark during those 7 days, March 11th through March 17th, then this already happened. Okay, people in America were already eating and drinking, and then God called his people to enter the ark. And so the flood came and took them all away. But what I think is interesting too, because it says, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay, so what happened is with the coronavirus, it was quick, it was sudden, we didn't expect it, we didn't see it coming. Even someone like I, who's been studying prophecy for a while, completely didn't see it coming. And so the exact same thing is going to happen when Jesus comes back. It's going to be quick, it's going to be sudden. I mean, I guess we do see people returning to eating and drinking, trying to get back to their lives. And so, like I said, the foolish virgins who are trying to buy oil, so just be prepared for that. We got another quick, sudden thing about to happen, and I've given you a heads up, Israel's going to get attacked. Okay, so then in Amos, okay, so what is he saying here? Okay, so in the book of Amos, he says, the Lord God of hosts, the one who touches the land so that it melts, and all those who dwell in it mourn, and all of it rises up like the Nile and subsides like the Nile of Egypt. The one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth, he who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth, the Lord is his name. Okay, so I thought this was a good verse to kind of show the why I believe we are in the flood. Okay, because he calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth. where we have God who is the one who touches the land so it melts, okay, and all of it who dwell in it mourn. Um, okay, he is, um, so he's called for the waters of the sea to bring judgment onto the earth, okay. And then it says, "Behold, the eyes of the Lord God are on the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from the face of the earth. Nevertheless, I will not totally destroy the house of Jacob." Okay, so God's people will be protected. Okay, um, and then, and I will shake the house of Israel among all nations as grain is shaken in a sieve, but not a kernel will fall to the ground. Okay, so he's got to separate the sheep and the goats. Okay, so a lot of the plagues and stuff that he's going to be doing is separating the sheep and the goats. And then it says okay, I didn't like the NASB translation of this. It says all the sinners of my people will die by the sword. Okay, I didn't like that. I like that it says all the sinful people will die by the sword, because I almost think it was a kind of a anti-Semitic translation. Like all the sinners of my people will die by the sword. Because that's not really what it says. Really, when you look at the words, it's all the sinful people will die by the sword. It's not really necessarily talking about his people. It just doesn't even make any sense. But it's okay, if you read it with the better translation, where it says all the sinful people will die by the sword, those who say the calamity will not overtake or confront us. So I think that's a good verse for our day, because we have all these people trying to get back to work saying, we're not going to be affected by the coronavirus, so they're on beaches without masks. They don't have a healthy fear of the coronavirus. Okay. So God says they're going to die by the sword. And then, so we want to have a healthy fear of the coronavirus. We want to be humble. Okay, and then God goes on to say, "In that day I will raise up the fallen booth of David and wall up its breaches. I will also raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in days of old." Okay, so David was the king of Israel. God is going to raise up the fallen booth of Israel. Raise up its ruins and rebuild it. Okay. Also, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will also plant vineyards and drink their wine and make gardens and eat their fruit. Okay, so definitely cool promises. So I already mentioned the second part of the plague. But the plague of hail too, I think, also encompasses what we're waiting for. And so in Exodus 9 it says, "Behold, about this time tomorrow I will send a very heavy hail, such as not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Now therefore bring your livestock and whatever you have in the field to safety. Every man and beast that is found in the field and is not brought home, when the hail comes down on them, will die. The one among the servants of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord made his servants and his livestock flee into the houses. But he who paid no regard to the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. Now the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand toward the sky, that hail may fall on all the land of Egypt, on man and on beast, and on every plant of the field throughout the land of Egypt. Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very severe, such as not had been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck all that was in the field through all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Then Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is the righteous one. I and my people are the wicked ones. So definitely, I think, we're about to see the fulfillment of this. What's interesting is from these verses, we can learn this concept of humility. We need to have a humble heart about God's plagues that he's sending, and not think that we can, just go wander around and be protected. If God gives us a warning, whether it be through, um, his people or even secular sources, we have to be humble. Okay. So that was one thing I wanted to bring up about these verses. But we also see this concept of fiery hail, which could definitely be a picture of missiles. Um, and and so what I believe is these missiles are going to fall on Israel. And what's interesting is that it said, only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Okay, so what I think is this is a prophetic shadow of is I believe Israel gets attacked, but in America we don't have hail. We're not going to get attacked by missiles. And that really has a lot to do with because Jesus is going to be born of the virgin, which means he's going to come out of the church. But he's going to be Jewish, okay? But he's going to come out of the church. And I believe that he's coming back to America because it's all about finishing up the time of the Gentiles. And so and really what I think is Jesus is going to come to America, and we're going to get a 40-day warning from Jesus. Just like the story of Jonah when he comes and he gives a 40-day warning. And so people are going to have a time to repent when Jesus is here, before the destruction of America. And so we're in the judgment on the firstborn. And what's interesting is that Israel is considered, the Jewish people are considered the firstborn, of God's kingdom of Israel. So I think, we've been seeing with the coronavirus kind of a little bit of this judgment on the firstborn, where, some of the people in leadership and stuff like that have been affected personally by the coronavirus. But I think it's going to continue that we're going to, then it's going to, God's going to put judgment on the Jewish people. But don't be arrogant. It's not because they're any more sinful than American Christians or Christians. It just has to do with God's purposes. And anyway, so in Exodus 11, it says, now the Lord said to Moses, one more plague I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely. So this is the verse where it says, speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Furthermore, the man Moses was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt. That would be a picture of Jesus, the Messiah. Thus says the Lord, about midnight, I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who's behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. So different groups of people get affected by this plague. So I think, it's almost like we could have three parts of this plague. So like the coronavirus maybe affected the slave girl behind the millstones in America. Then maybe the firstborn of Pharaoh could be a picture, who sits on his throne could be a picture of the Jewish people maybe. And then the firstborn of the cattle could be a picture of the people who are left, like the people that don't follow God. We'll have to see how it feels. Jesus will tell you the whole story. With the cattle, you got the picture of Pharaoh's dream where you have the 7 lean cattle, eat up the 7 fat cattle. And so that could be a picture of God's people too. So okay, so then it says, moreover, there be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. Okay. So let's see, I'm gonna read the rest of it. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Okay, so then it says, now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. Now the captive in the dungeon, that could be the Jewish people. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. Okay, so not looking forward to this. So be prepared that you might be woken up in the middle of the night with this going on. And then in Exodus 9 it says, now the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, that hail may fall on all the land of Egypt, on man and on beast, and on every plant of the field throughout the land of Egypt. The hail struck all that was in the field throughout the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree of the field. Okay, so I made a connection in one of my previous videos to, at the time of Jesus's birth, there were shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock by night. And so I think that could be a connection to the Jewish people that are going to get hit by this hail. So one thought that I wanted to bring up, we're getting close to the end here. One thought that I wanted to bring up was how God's using the coronavirus. Like, we've always heard that the 10 plagues in Israel were judgments on the gods of Egypt. Okay. And so I wanted to propose that the coronavirus, God is using this plague in America at this time to bring judgments on the gods and idols of America. And probably the other nations too. I mean, the thing that we have is that America has really kind of transported her sinful lifestyle to the nations of the world. Okay, and so the fact that we see the coronavirus in the various nations, could definitely be a judgment on the lifestyle that America transported to the various countries. Because, we used to transport, we used to bring Christianity into all the countries of the world until, we used to have missionaries everywhere until, until we kind of fell away from our Christian heritage, and then we ended up, like sharing Disney with the world and, our TV shows and, just a lot of things that are not very godly. So I just wanted to bring up some of my thoughts about some of the idols that God might be bringing judgment on during this time. So one of the things I thought was interesting is we've had a tendency in this country to want to spoil our kids and not tell them no. Okay, well, that has come back to bite us with if we let our kids go to spring break in Florida and then they came home and brought the coronavirus home. And so I've actually heard a situation where that happened. Okay, so that was definitely an idol that God was bringing judgment on. One of the things was, how they wanted to save the environment by not having plastic bags. Well, now all of a sudden with the coronavirus, plastic bags are looking pretty good. So I thought that was interesting, some of these things that are getting kind of turned around and stuff like that. And then another thing that happened is all of a sudden families became important again. We went through a time where, like, especially with millennials and stuff, where they were really taught that their families were bad. There was really kind of this attack on the traditional family, the nuclear family, but what we're seeing with the coronavirus is that all of a sudden we're recognizing the importance of our families. And then another thing I thought was interesting is all of a sudden clothes and fashion were no longer important. Remember how they were pretty important? And then when the coronavirus happened, those stores actually got shut down because they weren't I mean, first of all, I don't think anyone was even really shopping there. They cared more about the toilet paper and the food than the clothes, and then, but especially because you're shut down in your home, it doesn't really matter what your hairstyle looks like, what clothes you're wearing, because who's even seeing you, you know? And then what was interesting too is that cities, all of a sudden were no longer appealing. People didn't want to stay in the city of New York. Um, so I thought that was interesting. Um, because I kind of think that God maybe wants us to live more of a agrarian lifestyle. Um, I mean, not totally exactly, but I guess we'll see in the millennial kingdom what it's like. And then, but this whole concept of like packing people in like sardines, like in New York, I did not like the city of New York. I thought it was ugly. Um, I mean, it's kind of hard because there's parts about cities that I like, um, but then other parts that I don't like. I mean, I like to visit them, but I wouldn't want to live there, you know. And then what was interesting too, how we kind of went in this country, like all of a sudden someone came up with this idea of these open work environments. Okay, all of a sudden now they're no longer appealing. Okay, wouldn't it be nice to have your own office where you could shut the door and not worry about being around your coworkers? Um, what was interesting is God used the coronavirus to cancel sports events. Abortions were canceled. They were considered elective surgery, although people were protesting to try to get them back. Um, those wicked people. And then um, what's interesting too is that all of a sudden, it kind of like turned your um, thinking about politics on its head because one, for me, it helped me realize why it's important that we want to vote in uh, like people with good character, because if all of a sudden you're in a crisis like this, you need someone good leading your country or your state. Um, but just also when we saw politics being played during the coronavirus, like with masks, like it was just kind of like just really sad that people were still playing politics when it needed to be set aside. um, there was other things more important than playing politics, during the coronavirus. I mean, we were in survival mode. It wasn't about trying to get votes or, whatever, or accolades or anything like that. It was, you know, trying to take care of the people around you, you know. And then what was interesting too is that all of a sudden trading with China did not seem very appealing. Um, and I mean, I really kind of think we shouldn't have done that in America. Was, you know, I don't think you want to be um, conducting business with, ruthless dictators and, um, and other evil countries, like China. So those are a few. I'm sure there's plenty more that we could come up with. Definitely something for you to think about. What were some of the things that you thought were important in your life all of a sudden are no longer important? Um, Something to think about. How did God use the coronavirus and the isolation time, to, um, work in your life? What was He trying to teach you? Um, and then, okay, so I got a couple verses that I thought were kind of connected to these concepts. In Isaiah 30:15, it says, "This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. Only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength, but you would have none of it." Okay, so our salvation is only in God, okay? Um, so make sure you're not like those people that would have none of it. And then in Isaiah 31, okay, so God says, "Though you are wicked rebels, my people, come and return to the Lord. I know the glorious day will come when each of you will throw away the gold idols and silver images your sinful hands have made." Okay, so God actually prophesied that there would be a day that we would throw away our idols. And so I think we're living out this day right now with the coronavirus. All of a sudden, what we thought was important is no longer important. Um, and then, I mean, God calls us wicked rebels, we need to stop being rebellious against God. We need to return to Him. So in Psalm 46, it says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. And then God says, cease and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So these verses are really important to help us understand this is the work of God. Okay. I mean, it was interesting. I saw on Easter, a pastor said, one, God is not mad at you, and two, God did not cause this. Okay. I completely disagree with that. I think God has some anger. He has some anger, even though we are His people, we probably can still make God angry by not following Him, by disobeying Him. I mean, as parents, don't you get angry at your kids when they disobey you? um and so God might be mad at us. It just depends on what our lifestyle looks like. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're going to hell, if we believe in Jesus as the Messiah. um you know Jesus is gonna, Jesus is our salvation, and He sets us free from the wrath of God and the judgment of God. But He, um, I mean, right now we're suffering the anger of God because we don't follow Him, and so He is working in our lives to try to get us to turn back to Him. And I thought it was interesting that He said, and because in these verses it says, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. Okay, God is the one who made this happen. Okay. And I thought it was interesting that it says, we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea. Okay, that's kind of what happened with this coronavirus. All of a sudden, our lives were going one way, and boom, it was like completely turned around. So the earth, especially if the earth is a prophetic shadow of America, it definitely changed. Although it did really happen around the world. Around the world it changed, So anyways, and so this verse that says, okay, so this is, if you don't take anything else out of these verses, but you take this one verse out of this video. Okay, this is the most important thing I wanted to say in this video. The importance of the coronavirus is because God wants us to cease and know that He is God, and He will be exalted among the nations. He will be exalted in the earth. So, how many of us would actually just stop our lives and think about God? Okay. Um, you know, so what happened with the coronavirus is we might not have chose to do it on our own, but God was going to make that happen. He was going to cause our life to cease so that we would recognize that He was God, so that we would turn to Him and start thinking about Him and exalt Him. Okay. So, God is a jealous God, and He will not, allow other gods to be worshipped, especially by His people, so, so that's what I believe God is doing. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to cover in this video, because I thought this would be helpful, is that Steve Keolanti had a dream. And so he is the guy from Discover Ministries, I think is what it's called. And so he had a dream, and he didn't really, he kind of seemed like he had trouble interpreting it. And so I wanted to give my thoughts of the interpretation of his dream. So his dream was actually kind of like a two-part dream. Okay, and you could actually go watch the video. It's on YouTube, obviously, on under his channel. So actually it started out where there was a big soccer match. And then the second part of the dream was where he saw an explosion at the Melbourne CBD. Okay. So let's talk about the soccer match part of it. So what he saw was there was a big soccer match. He emphasized that it was a big match. And then in Melbourne, okay, which is in Australia. He's from Australia. Um, and so what he saw in his dream is that there was a famous soccer player who could kick the ball into the goal. Like he was still able to kick the ball into the goal, even though there was a big wall put in front of the goal. Because this famous soccer player could still see the goal despite the big wall. Okay. And then Steve talked about there being like two stones and two scrolls connected to the goal, I think. And the scrolls were like inside the stones. Okay. And so what Steve had to do in his dream is he had to go up in the building in order to see the whole field. Like he couldn't really see the two stones or the two scrolls. And so that, so in order to see the whole field, he had to go up in the building. And then he was shown a Jewish Torah scroll. And then also in his dream, he goes into the bathroom in this building. So that was the first part of the dream. So what I thought was interesting is that, okay, so I thought it was interesting that it was a soccer match because soccer balls are black and white. And so I think what he was seeing was like a match between good and evil. Okay, like the big match of, or the big confrontation between good and evil. Okay. And then what was interesting is that it happened in Melbourne. And so I did some research on Melbourne. And so it's a city that's south in Australia. The guy that was named after, his family name is actually Lamb. Okay. And he was actually the political mentor to the young queen. So what we have is, I think we have a connection with Melbourne to the southern kingdom of Israel, or Judah, okay, or the Jewish people, or the nation of Israel today. And then, because what we have is with the family name being Lamb, there's a connection to the Passover lamb story. So, okay, and then also if you understand that the Jewish people are going to be the teachers and the scribes in the Messianic kingdom. I mean, so the young queen would be like a picture of, the bride of Messiah, and then the Jewish people would be the mentor or the scribes, to the young queen. So I thought that was interesting. And then this famous soccer player, I thought could be a picture of the Messiah. And so he could still kick the ball into the goal because he could see the goal despite the big wall. Okay, so I thought the wall was the wall between Jew and Gentile. Okay, and then Steve in his dream saw two stones that had scrolls in them, and I think that's connected to the two pillars of Israel, or the two nations of Israel. God's going to build his kingdom with stones from Christians and stones from, the living stones from Christians, and the living stones from Judaism, the Jewish living stones and the Christian living stones. And so the scrolls too are actually like, it's kind of interesting because the Jewish people would be kind of connected to the New Testament, and then the Jewish people would be connected to the Torah, so that would be like the two scrolls. I mean, even though a Christian Bible has, both, the both parts of the Bible, the Christians tend to focus more on the New Testament. That's more important to them. Anyway, so Steve in his dream, he had to so this famous soccer player, he could kick the ball into the goal because he could still see the goal. And so Jesus knows the goal is to bring together the two pillars of the nation of Israel. He knows the goal is to he knows that God's people, that God's word is, both, in the New Testament and the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, as the Christians call it. So Jesus could see into the gold. The wall between Jew and Gentile, Jesus can see past that. And he knows the goal. He knows the goal is to bring together Jew and Gentile. Um, and then, so Steve gets brought up in the building to see the whole field. Okay, so there's this picture of Steve has to go up into a higher spiritual plane where Jesus is. Okay, um, you know, in order to see the whole field. So he's not seeing the whole picture. Um, well, so what's interesting too is that because I actually saw a video that Steve did about the deal of the century, and he actually did not think it was that bad of a deal. Like, um, and I totally disagreed with him. And so I think he has a um, the wall between Jew and Gentile. Sometimes I wonder if the wall is anti-Semitism, and so I'm thinking that Steve he's missing the goal because he's got this wall of anti-Semitism, and so he needs Jesus to come and bring him up on a spiritual higher plane to set him free from his anti-Semitism, so he could see the whole field. Okay. um and it was interesting that he was shown a Jewish Torah scroll, um because I think there might be parts of um I think there's things that Steve is missing about, like, I don't think Steve understands the whole purpose of the Jewish people and how they are meant to be God's leaders in the Messianic kingdom. And so I think Jesus is going to teach him that. um what was interesting is that Steve went into the bathroom of this building, and so he needs a chastening, he needs a cleansing. If the building is a picture of Jesus, then Steve needs Jesus to cleanse him, to chasten him. And that could also be a picture of the coronavirus chastening, because then he goes in his dream, he then has a dream about an explosion. Okay, so what in the second part of his dream, he sees an explosion at the Melbourne CBD, which I guess there's nothing really called, it doesn't really exist, the Melbourne CBD. It's just something in his dream. It's a symbolic thing in his dream. And then, so what he sees is that people are looking at the explosion through a glass wall. Okay. And then, so he had 3 questions in his dream about the explosion. Is it nuclear? And they saw in his dream that it was a series of chain bombs. And then he asked, is this the beginning of the end? And then he asked, what is the best way to get down? To get to get away from the explosion. So what I would like to propose is that it was interesting because he really didn't know what this dream meant. And so what I believe he was seeing is, because I already did that research on Melbourne, he was actually seeing a picture of the explosion that's going to happen in Israel, in the southern kingdom, um, um, to Judah, because of Melbourne. What was interesting is CBD could be 324 because C is the third letter of the alphabet, B is the second, D is the fourth. Okay, so what's interesting is, because this is what I think we're waiting for, is the third day or the 24th day. Okay, so I think there's a connection to the third day or the 24th day in this explosion. And then what was interesting is that the people were looking at the explosion through the glass wall. The glass wall to me could be a picture of like a TV screen. Okay, and so because I actually think we're going to be seeing the explosion in Israel on TV. Although, God, there is something like maybe some verses in Matthew where maybe we'll see it in the sky. Something in the sky. I'm not sure what. Okay, so I had another thought about the glass wall. um okay, was, oh, this also reminded me of, like, I might not have mentioned this, but there's a part where Noah opens the window of the ark and he lets out a raven. I don't think I had that in my slides. I don't remember talking about that. Um, and that happens after the 40 days. Um, and so, um, what I think is we see a connection with the window. Okay, so when God had Noah build the ark, he was supposed to build the window, but it didn't go all the way up to the top. And then he also put a door in the ark. And so I think a window is the picture of Trump, the false Messiah, because the window is also connected to Jezebel. Okay. And so Jezebel, when I think it's Elisha or whoever it is was coming to get Jezebel to kill her, she paints her eyes and she stands at the window. Okay, so there's a connection with Jezebel to a window. Okay, so I think the window is supposed to be a picture of Trump. And then, because Jesus actually comes and says, I am the door. Okay, so the window is a picture of the false way to get in, where the door is the right way to get in. Okay, and so, anyway, so I see kind of this connection with the window being open in the ark. And so, because Trump went in the false way, first of all, he already caused the coronavirus plague to come. Now he's going to cause Israel to get attacked by their enemies. Okay. And then, so then Stephen is dreaming. He asks, is it nuclear? Okay, that is definitely what we're going to ask after Israel gets attacked. Okay, he talked about it being a series of chain bombs. I thought that was interesting because Israel's enemies have figured out that they can do a series of bombs to fake out the Iron Dome system in Israel. You know, so that could be what he was seeing. And then he asked, is this the beginning of the end? Okay, well, it's going to be the beginning for God's people when you see the time of the Messiah come in as a new beginning. Okay, what I see in my study of the scriptures is that that the same time Israel gets attacked is the same time that Messiah is showing up. Okay. So just so you know, the beginning would be the beginning of the time of Messiah. You know, so don't get too freaked out because the Messiah, look up for your redemption draws nigh. We're supposed to look up, I think, when the enemies surround Jerusalem. Okay, and then in his dream, Steve was wondering the best way to get down, the elevator or the stairs. Okay, so I'm thinking the elevator is a picture of Trump and the stairs are a picture of the Messiah. You know, and Steve figured out that stairs are the safest way to get down during a dangerous time. Because, okay, so let's look at an elevator or the stairs. So the elevator there's like a quick rise to the top with the elevator, but with the stairs, you kind of have to take your time to get up. And so there's kind of a connection to, there's 15 steps to the altar in the Torah. And what we see in the Seder is that there's 15 steps of, kind of connected to suffering. And so what we see is connected to Messiah is like these 15 steps of suffering. Okay. The reason why he's the Messiah, the reason why he's the Lamb, who deserves the praise is that he went through the suffering. Okay. He went through the 15 steps of suffering. And then, but what we have is, so if you compare and contrast that to Trump, so Trump was like, okay, when you look at Trump's life, how much suffering do you think he had in his life? Trump has had a very charmed life. Things were, basically kind of handed to him on a silver platter. Okay. He hasn't had to work too hard. Things always worked out easy for him. So he had kind of a quick rise to the top. Okay, he didn't have to work his way to the top. He had a quick rise to the top. And so there's actually a connection. There's a similar picture in the Jonah chapter 4, where there's this plant that grows up after, grows up over Jonah to give him shade, but then a worm comes and eats the plant. And so we see this plant that grew quickly and then gets cut down quickly. Okay, that's a picture of Trump, the false Messiah. Okay, but the plant came and it gave Jonah shade for a short amount of time. That could be a picture of like Netanyahu and some of the Jewish people or other people and Christians that follow him, because they wanted the shade that Trump brought, but it was this temporary shade. It wasn't the true peace that Messiah was going to bring. So the best way to get down is by the stairs, because you want to follow Messiah and not Trump. And it's possible that these are things that God wants Steve to think about. And really to see how the deal of the century was kind of this quick solution and not the true solution that God has to bring, that Messiah will bring. The true peace that Messiah will bring. Okay, so those are my thoughts on that. So like I said, we have the sea of Obama on one side, we have the sea of Trump on the other. We want to be in the middle when the sea gets parted with Messiah. There's no lies with Messiah. And then, when the sea split, the hidden world is going to come to light. We're going to see God's people. There's going to be a division when the Messiah comes of the sheep and the goats. Okay. So that was my dream of my dream. This is my video of let the people get back to work. And so I really think this is kind of the voice of Pharaoh. Definitely I want you to be safe when you go to work. Wear your mask. Really, I pray for God's grace on you. If you have a boss who's wicked, that just wants you to produce bricks, and doesn't really care about your well-being, that would be a really difficult situation to be in. So I definitely pray for God's grace for you during that time. I definitely pray for God's grace for all of God's people right now during this difficult time. Hang in there. I think we could look up. I think our redemption draws nigh. I really appreciate you listening to my video. Hopefully it was helpful. I know a lot of times I get the dates wrong, so please forgive me on that. Like I said, I'm the partial prophet. I don't totally know for sure. I just have some ideas. And, I know when Jesus comes, he's going to clear it up and we're going to see things more fully. So thanks for listening. God bless. Hang in there. Look up for your redemption draws nigh. I think we can expect Jesus any minute now. So thanks for tuning in.